29 knives. Seems like a funny topic for a devotional, doesn't it? Well, bear with me while I explain. I'm taking a dive into the relatively obscure books of Ezra and Nehemiah. These books deal with the period in the history of ancient Israel following the return from exile in Babylon, a period that lasted about 100 years, as not everyone returned at the same time. Yesterday we read from the beginning of Ezra, the decree from the Persian king Cyrus, returning the people to their land and instructing them to rebuild their temple. Today, we see one of the practical results of that decree. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Wednesday, January 5th, 2021. When the Babylonian Empire under King Nebuchadnezzar defeated smaller states to form his great empire, his policy was to destroy important symbols of each nation's identity and to exile its leading citizens, thus literally cutting off the heads of the nations. Now the Babylonians have been defeated by the Persian Empire, and as we saw yesterday, Cyrus's policy was to win the hearts and minds of the various nations by sending their exiled leaders back and rebuilding the important structures that had been destroyed by the Babylonians. Clearly, the most important structure, the very heart of Israel, was the temple in Jerusalem. To rebuild it would be to regain a sense of national identity. But the temple was more than just the structure itself. It was more than just a building. Even a cursory reading of the book of Leviticus would give you a sense of the furniture and the furnishings of the temple. The altar, the curtains, the silverware and goldware. It was a lot of stuff. And when Nebuchadnezzar had ordered the temple destroyed, instead of destroying all its furnishings, he stole them as spoils of war. Today I want to read one of those otherwise sleep-inducing lists of things that we find so often in the Old Testament. It records a remarkable event. The heads of the families of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites, everyone whose spirit God had stirred, got ready to go up and rebuild the house of the Lord in Jerusalem. All their neighbors aided them with silver vessels, with gold, with goods, with animals, and with valuable gifts, besides all that was freely offered. King Cyrus himself brought out the vessels of the house of the Lord that Nebuchadnezzar had carried away from Jerusalem and placed in the house of his gods. King Cyrus of Persia had them released into the charge of Mithridath, the treasurer, and counted them out to Sheshbazzar, the prince of Judah. And this was the inventory: gold basins, 30. Silver basins, 1,000. Knives, 29. Gold bowls, 30. Other silver bowls, 410. Other vessels, 1,000. The total of the gold and silver vessels was 5,400. All these Sheshbazzar brought up when the exiles were brought up from Babylonia to Jerusalem. 30 gold basins and 1,000 silver basins. 30 gold bowls and 410 silver bowls. 1,000 assorted vessels. And knives, 29 of them. What an odd number. Everything else is a pretty round number, as if they could be sort of an estimate. But 29 knives is pretty specific. It sticks out in a way, doesn't it? No pun intended. So what's up with that? Well, I don't want to oversell this because I don't think the number 29 is significant in and of itself, but the specificity does point to a kind of gritty reality, reminding us what everything else in the temple was for. It was all for the practice of sacrifices, both animal sacrifice and grain offering. Why else would they need knives? It was all about sacrifice. Now, I'm sure there is some academic somewhere in the world who could tell us about the knives that were used in the temple. I'm sure, for example, that there were different kinds of knives for different uses. After all, part of the practice of animal sacrifice included what we would think of as the work of butchers in a meat market, carving up animals into their constituent parts. I don't mean to be gross here, but that was simply part of the practice. Perhaps among the 29 knives there were complete sets, one for each of several different priests to use. All of that is speculation, of course, but it all points to one thing. The temple in Jerusalem would not just be rebuilt, it would be used once again for its intended purpose, to bring sacrifices and offerings to the Lord. Odd, isn't it, what we can learn from an inventory of what Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple? Tomorrow, the question arises, who is part of us? Who's in and who's not? It was a major question facing the returning exiles. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.